If you are a business professional, or maybe you're even thinking about dropping six figures on a graduate business degree, you really need to understand the single biggest threat facing that entire industry. And surprisingly, it's not a market crash.
No.
It's the total disruption of educational value by generative AI.
Yeah.
It sounds dramatic, I know, but the evidence is already, well, it's overwhelming.
It really is an existential question. It hits right at the foundation of the whole education model.
Mm.
So our mission in this deep dive is to ask, what is the actual value of a business education undergrad, graduate, MBA when these AI tools, these LLMs, can do so many of the core analytical tasks that, have propped up the curriculum for decades?
Right.
We're here to unpack this huge disruption and, I think most importantly, to identify what we're calling the irreducibly human skills that these schools have to focus on if they're going to survive.
And when you say existential, you mean this is immediate. This isn't some forecast for 2035, is it?
Not at all. The data is already in.
I mean, there was that recent study showing generative AI systems completing really complex business tasks, things like strategic analysis, financial modeling, and they're doing it at levels that are comparable to and sometimes even better than current business school grads. That's the shocking part.
Exactly. The capability threshold has been crossed. And just look where the pressure is building. Accenture is projecting these AI models could impact something like 40% of all work hours.
40%, that's huge.
And it's concentrated right in those knowledge-heavy fields: strategy, finance, complex analysis, the very jobs that have always been the prime recruiting grounds for business schools.
So if the core skill is suddenly automated,
The clock is absolutely ticking on the old model.
to really get the severity of this, I think we have to look back at the historical bargain. Why did people spend so much money on these degrees? After that big 1959 Gordon and Howell report, business schools basically positioned themselves as the only real pathway to these lucrative careers. And that's what justified tuition of, what, 50 to 80,000 for undergrads.
And way over 200,000 for a top graduate program.
So what were we fundamentally paying for?
You are paying for an architecture built on scarcity. And historically, students paid for three main pillars. And the thing is, AI is dismantling all three of them at the same time.
Okay, so let's break those down. What's the first one?
The first pillar is knowledge transfer and skill development. So think about the classic case method, or learning to build a discounted cash flow model, mastering Porter's 5 forces. All of these traditional frameworks were based on the assumption that analytical capability was scarce.
That was the barrier to entry. You paid to learn the secret handshake.
It was the whole point.
Huh.
You paid a premium and spent 2 years mastering a technique because that technique was difficult, it was time-consuming, and it needed a specialized human to do it.
And now?
Now, AI just commoditizes that scarcity. If you can feed a scenario into a model and get back a detailed financial forecast and market strategy in, 30 seconds?
The value of spending months learning the mechanics of how to build that model it evaporates. That makes the cost-benefit analysis feel pretty brutal. If I'm a student and the core skill I'm paying 150 grand to learn, say, operational optimization, is now basically a free instant utility.
Then what are you left with?
Exactly.
And that leads us right to the second pillar: credential signaling.
The power of the diploma.
Right. In the pre-AI world, an elite degree was a powerful signal. It told employers you had capability, a strong work ethic, cognitive horsepower. It was a really important screening tool.
But if I can use generative AI to write, to structure, to maybe even solve huge parts of my exams and assignments, and let's be honest, many students are, doesn't that just corrupt the signal? What do my grades even mean then?
Precisely. The signal gets fuzzy. The degree still says you finished the program, but what does an A in strategy actually tell an employer about your real ability when AI assistance is everywhere?
And employers must be seeing this already.
Well, they are. And they're responding. They're shifting away from just relying on the credential. They're demanding work samples, running these high-fidelity simulations, focusing on actual project work. Things AI can't fake. The paper degree is losing its power as a filter.
So the knowledge is commoditized, the signal is getting weaker. That leaves us with the last pillar, the one everyone falls back on, relationship building and the network. This is the one that seems the most human-proof, right?
It's definitely the most resistant, but AI still changes the economics and the very nature of that network. For one, remote collaboration tools mean you don't need to be in the same physical room as much.
That chips away at the advantage of a residential program.
It does. And more importantly, because AI can handle all the transactional stuff, the information transfer, the relationships that really matter now are the ones that involve high-stakes judgment, deep personal trust, and navigating really complex ethical situations.
So the network isn't about finding a contact who can get you some data anymore.
Right.
It's about finding someone you trust, implicitly, when the data is a mess or it's pointing you toward an ethically dangerous decision.
Exactly that. When knowledge is instant, the value of the network shifts entirely to wisdom and trust. AI can write the perfect follow-up email, sure, but it can't build the trust you need to close a $50 million deal.
Which brings us back to the MBA crisis specifically. These programs charge a huge premium based on teaching these advanced frameworks and using that credential to get people into consulting or finance.
Right.
If the main deliverable of a consultant, that sophisticated strategic analysis, can be done by a model, the value of spending 2 years and all that money becomes, it becomes really hard to justify. The whole calculation just breaks down.
The pressure is just so intense, and yet you see so many of these schools still teaching the same old core curriculum. So why aren't they adapting? I mean, these are the institutions that are supposed to advise the world on strategic agility.
That is a fantastic question. You'd think they would be the first ones to pivot.
Well, they're caught in a structural problem. We call it the ranking trap.
Right.
And this is the key thing that's holding them back.
The rankings, U.S. News, the Financial Times, they're the Bible for applicants, which means they are the main source of fear for the institutions.
That's it, precisely. These major rankings create enormous pressure to converge. They weigh these easily measured metrics so heavily, things like starting salaries, standardized test scores like the GMAT, faculty research output.
I see the trap. So if the rankings reward high starting salaries, then schools have to optimize their curriculum to place students into the highest paying, most standardized jobs.
Which are consulting and finance. So this incentive structure, it rewards homogenization, not radical innovation. They all teach the same core frameworks: Porter's, BCG matrix, SWOT, because that curriculum has a proven track record of getting graduates those high-paying jobs, which then fuels the next ranking cycle.
It's a closed loop.
It is. And that rigidity is what prevents the radical reinvention they need to shift away from teaching skills that are just being automated away. They're trapped by a system that was designed for an economy that doesn't exist anymore.
And because of that rigid structure, this disruption isn't going to hit every program the same way. The impact is really asymmetrical, isn't it? Let's talk about who is most vulnerable right now.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Let's think of business programs like ships on a stormy sea. They all handle the waves very differently.
Okay, I like that. Tell us about the PRIPS.
Well, first you have the elite residential programs, the top 20 MBAs. These are the aircraft carriers. They have incredible inertia, incredible resilience because of their brand and their exclusive global network.
It's tough to sink.
Very. But they face intense ROI pressure because their tuition is astronomical. Their value is now resting almost entirely on that exclusive network and less on the actual content they teach.
Then you have the most exposed ships in the fleet.
Those would be the mid-tier programs, say ranked 20 to 100. They're like the small cruise ships. They're in the most vulnerable position because they're expensive, but they're not unique enough.
Caught in the middle.
Exactly. They compete on knowledge transfer and career placement, but they can't compete with the elites on network prestige, and they can't compete with online programs on cost. As tuition keeps rising and knowledge becomes a commodity, their ROI gets really, really hard to defend.
And the last ship. The specialized master's programs.
Those are the speedboats.
Yeah.
But they're speedboats that were designed for a very specific purpose that AI just made obsolete. They are incredibly vulnerable because they focus so intensely on specific technical skills, business analytics or financial engineering, that AI can now augment or just flat out replace with shocking ease. Their narrow focus makes them an immediate target. So if just adding an AI for business class isn't going to be enough,
Which it isn't.
then the solution has to be a fundamental shift in the whole purpose of the degree. Business schools have to pivot to capabilities that AI can't, or at least can't yet, replicate.
Things like causal reasoning, contextual judgment, ethical navigation.
And high-stakes relationship building, yes.
That sounds great as a talking point, but what does that actually look like in a classroom? How do you teach contextual judgment in a way that an AI won't just learn to do in 2 years?
That is the critical challenge. And we're seeing a shift away from simple framework application, that's the old model, to what some researchers are calling representational design.
Representational design.
Wharton is doing some pioneering work here. They're redesigning their curriculum to teach students not just how to use a standard framework like the five forces, but how to design a custom analytical representation that really captures the unique dynamics of a new, ambiguous situation.
Wait, unpack that a little. If I'm using the five forces, I'm just plugging my data into a pre-made box. Are you saying students now have to design the box itself?
Precisely. You're targeting the human capability of causal reasoning, of looking at a chaotic mess of data and figuring out which factors actually matter, how they relate to each other, and then building a model that reflects reality, not just applying a textbook template. That act of judgment, of design, is still uniquely human.
And this is where it gets really interesting because the goal isn't to ignore AI, it's to learn how to use it as a co-pilot, right?
I'm thinking of what USC's Marshall School is doing.
Yes.
They're positioning students as AI-augmented strategists. And that's the key. The core competency becomes the human's ability to ask the right questions, the critical questions that the AI can then go and answer productively. And then you have to rigorously evaluate the AI's output because we know they hallucinate.
You have to check the work.
You have to.
Yeah.
And then you integrate those insights with the qualitative stuff, organizational culture, office politics, you name it.
That synthesis role, combining the machine's analytical power with human wisdom and context, that's the new baseline. And as AI handles more of the analysis, our judgment has to shift to the hardest part, the ethical side.
It's non-negotiable now. Harvard Business School revised its MBA program to weave leadership and corporate accountability modules through the entire first year. They force students to analyze cases where the numbers are clear. The AI gives you the most profitable answer, but the ethical ambiguity is just huge.
So the AI gives you the efficient answer, but not necessarily the right answer.
Exactly. That judgment still rests entirely on the human. MIT Sloan is doing something similar, integrating ethical dilemmas in data-driven decision-making across their core courses. They're forcing students to confront algorithmic bias, privacy issues. These are the new, complex problems created by the tech that only human ethical reasoning can solve.
So if knowledge is now a commodity, the entire value of a business education has to shift. It's not just what they teach anymore, it's how they teach it. The value is in the capabilities you develop through practice.
And we are seeing some really clever schools leveraging AI not as a threat to be policed during exams, but as a learning partner.
How does that work in practice?
So there's a pilot at Wharton where students use AI to generate the initial case analysis, the standard 5-page report.
Okay.
Then the class discussion is focused entirely on critiquing the AI's output. They spend zero time on the mechanics of writing the report and 100% of their time asking, where did the AI miss the context? Where did it fail on causal reasoning? Where is this assumption ethically shaky?
That's brilliant. You offload the grunt work to the machine and force students to develop the higher-order critical evaluation skills. You're training them to find the machine's weaknesses, which are our human strengths.
And the shift is also toward more and more experiential learning, getting away from those neat, simulated case studies and into the real world, where information is messy and incomplete.
Can you give us an example of that outside the classroom?
Look at the University of Michigan's Ross School. They have a required program, the Multidisciplinary Action Project, or MAP. Student teams work on actual live business challenges for real clients, corporate or nonprofit. They have to navigate incomplete data, stakeholder politics, all the messy reality that a clean case study just edits out.
And then there's Babson College, which is all about entrepreneurship.
Exactly. They're now requiring students to actually create ventures, not just write venture plans.
Right.
And AI can write you a fantastic 50-page business plan, but it cannot build trust with a co-founder. It can't read the subtle cues from a nervous first customer, and it can't give you the resilience to persist through all the ambiguity of a real launch. They're targeting those irreplaceable human skills.
And this all seems to be driving a need for strategic differentiation. Schools are realizing they can't all just be a version of Harvard anymore, right? They can't all be generalists.
They absolutely need to specialize. Take Yale School of Management. They're explicitly prioritizing integrated leadership for business and society over just optimizing for those traditional consulting and finance placement numbers. They are carving out a specific niche based on a human value set.
And some are even moving past that to a completely new platform model.
That's right. Berkeley Haas has this Haas at Work platform. They're basically acting as an ecosystem orchestrator. They connect students, alumni, and companies around actual strategic questions from real businesses. The value comes from facilitating that flow of knowledge, not from claiming to own it.
They're a hub, not a library.
Perfect way to put it. And all of this requires a new institutional muscle, adaptive capacity. The tech is moving so fast that the ability to adapt is more important than any single curriculum design. That's why you see a place like Cambridge's Judge Business School creating a Futures Lab.
What's that?
It's a group that continuously scans for weak signals, new employer needs, shifts in student attitudes, and then recommends curriculum experiments. They're basically building strategic foresight into the DNA of the institution.
So let's bring this all together. What does this mean for you, the learner, trying to navigate this new landscape? The conclusion seems pretty clear. Small, incremental fixes aren't going to work.
No.
Differentiation is now everything. And the future value of a business degree has to be built around the two things AI can't do: high-stakes judgment and deep trust-based relationships. The whole industry is going to fragment into these niche specialists, platform models, and probably low-cost providers.
And for students today, the question you have to ask is incredibly personal. Is the program you're looking at its very core, actually developing capabilities AI can't replicate? Things like ethical navigation or that representational design we talked about.
And are the career paths they're pointing you towards even going to be viable in 5 or 10 years?
That's the other half of it. Business schools have taught strategic transformation and agility to corporations for decades. They advise the world's biggest companies on how to handle disruption. The ultimate defining test of this entire era is whether these institutions, the very advisors on foresight, have the courage and the capacity to apply those same principles to themselves, to radically reinvent themselves before they become obsolete. It's a really high-stakes test of whether they can actually practice what they preach.
I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.